and she is a medical illustrator and an associate professor of the John Hopkins University School of Medicine.
Combination of science and art, but it's also very important that communication is important for the patient to know about the procedure. I believe there are 40 or 50 clinical anaplastologists in the world, really help the patient reintegrate into society. I would like to think of AI as a helpful intern. I think it can enrich anyone's life.
Hello everyone and welcome to POD-TAC. My name is María and I will be presenting today's episode. As you might have already noticed, we're doing a different version today because we're doing it in English. And the reason why is because our guest today comes from the States. Her name is Corinne Sandone and she is a medical illustrator and an associate professor of the John Hopkins University School of Medicine, where she also directs the Department of Arts as applied to medicine. She also graduated there and received her MA in medical and biological illustration, and she now combines the worlds of illustrating and teaching. Welcome, Corinne. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So after your presentation today at the Arts as Applied to Medicine Symposium in Barcelona, there are so many topics we wanted to discuss with you, but if you don't mind, the first thing I wanted to ask you is about the beginning of your career. How did you decide that you wanted to pursue medical illustration? Was it something that you always had in mind? Was it something you knew you would end up doing? And also, how did you find out about the existence of these masters?
I found out about medical illustration when I was in high school. I was fortunate enough to do some exploration about careers, and I found this as a career that combined my interest in art and also in biology at the time. I think you saw the slide I showed today that said it's a combination of science and art, but it's also very important that communication is part of it. I didn't really understand that completely, but medical illustration is really all about communicating information to a specific audience.
Great. Because I feel like medical illustration, like we, especially medical students, biology students, it's something we take for granted. We see it in our books, but on the internet, but sometimes we don't really know what's behind those drawings and what is the process behind. If you could explain like what your job really entails and how the whole process of making a medical illustration happens.
Sure. So I do a lot of surgical illustration, and I trained as a general medical illustrator, but started going into the operating room to work on a surgical atlas. And that requires observing the surgery. I don't even take pictures in there because the pictures are so hard to interpret. The photographs are hard to interpret. I talk with the surgeon, I observe, and then I go back to the department and make a series of sketches. Then I'll meet with the doctor and talk about the sketches, what's correct, what's incorrect. And then we refine the sketches, and then when it's all approved and signed off in basically a pencil sketch, then I start the final either watercolor painting, and now I do about 80% of the work on the board in watercolor, and then I scan it in and I finish it in Photoshop and do the labels and maybe make some edits in Photoshop. I used to do it 100% traditional, okay, but now I use the digital technology.
And how much do you feel like you cooperate with physicians and doctors?
Yeah, a lot of back and forth. I'll show them the work and they'll say, oh, this looks great, but I have to really focus them on, like, is this scale, is the proportion right? Is this the right amount of sutures in this step? And a lot of it is listening to them and interpreting their needs, hearing what they're saying, and then transforming that into some kind of visual that helps them communicate what they need to communicate to a specific audience. It can be to other surgeons if they're training them, or it can be to patients, for patients to understand what is important for the patient to know about the procedure. Not all the steps of the procedure, but more like the importance of the procedure, and the before and after might be sufficient for a patient to understand.
That's so interesting, because I feel like it's something that you really pointed out during your presentation, like that medical illustration is not only meant for people who are learning to become a scientist or physician or doctors who are currently working, but also to patients. And I wanted to ask you about what kind of impact does it have for a patient to understand what procedures are they going to happen to them, and also what benefit is there for us as doctors for the patient to know what we're doing to them?
I think it depends a little bit on the patient, but generally speaking, I think that the patient wants to understand maybe not so much what is going to happen, but why they need it and what the benefit will be. And I think there's an incredible impact to have the doctor either show them an illustration or even make an illustration. One of the things that we make for some of the doctors is a template, for example, that will show the pancreas, and then the doctor will draw on the drawing and say, in your case, your tumor is here, I'm going to divide the here, and I think it really personalizes it, and it helps the patients understand and build confidence in communication with the physician. We also, there's a lot of patient education material on the market now, but as with many things in 2023, we're concerned about the diversity and want to make sure that patients can either recognize themselves in some of the illustrations, race, gender, body type, or have them be generic enough that they don't feel excluded from the healthcare.
And do you get the feedback from doctors who are using these templates you used
yeah,
before?
Yeah. They need more of them, so that's a good sign. Yeah. We also do some evaluation of the visuals, where mostly this occurs in our students' master's thesis projects. If they create something and they get permission to do a survey with the patients before and after to measure the comprehension of what's going to happen.
That's great. Also, following with the whole patient impact of medical illustration, during your presentation you explained to us this thing called anaplastology, which I personally had never heard before. Could you explain us a bit what anaplastology stands for, and what do you do at John Hopkins?
Sure. So this is another form of art in medicine, and really it's medical sculpture. So I have a couple of pieces with me. These are creating facial prostheses for patients who are missing a nose, an ear, an eye.
If you could, could really see them closely, these are outstanding. They look so real. It's crazy.
And these are custom made for patients by a clinical anaplastologist. So this is a very specialized field. I believe there are 40 or 50 clinical anaplastologists in the world, and we have recently established a 2-year training program for people who have artistic talent and almost a pre-medical background to come and train and create custom facial prosthetics or fingers and toes, breasts, other body parts. These really help the patient reintegrate into society. Patients say things like, I can now walk through the airport without everybody staring at me, or I can interact with my grandchildren without wearing a big patch or a bandage on my face. And interestingly, insurance will pay for these as durable medical equipment. Mm-hmm. So we're training 2 students per year in a 2-year program. And it's brand new at Hopkins, and I'm really excited about the patients that it's going to benefit.
So interesting, because usually when we think about prosthetics, we think about more functional prosthetics.
Yeah.
But this, you pointed out, that it also has an impact on the way, in their appearance, in the way they relate with other people.
Yeah, and really reintegrate into society, return to work. Interact with family members, just being comfortable going to the grocery store and feeling comfortable with themselves. And it takes a lot of talent and care to make sure that the prosthesis it should be a camouflage, but that it's well-fitting, that it's comfortable. If it's not comfortable, they're not gonna wear it. So. Yeah.
So following to this, because I feel like this is a brand, as you said, a brand new thing you're doing. How do you feel? Because during the last years, there's so many technologies being developed, especially in the design area. Also, like artists are using like new media. How do you feel are the similarities and differences between medical illustration now and what medical illustration was like around when the John Hopkins department started? What do you think are the things that have stuck with medical illustration, and what things are constantly being renewed?
So you saw the images, that some of them were 100 years old, and they were really communicating visually things that you could write a paragraph or 2 paragraphs about it, but you get the idea immediately, and that's because of the clarity of the image. I think that the things that are new are different media and technologies. Certainly digital technologies to create 2-dimensional art, Photoshop, Illustrator, but also the 3-dimensional technologies and animation, 2D and 3D animation are effective, but the concepts are the same, the science and the art, so it has to be accurate. I feel that that's the science. The art is the beauty of it, but really the most important part, the foundation, is the clarity of the communication. So that hasn't changed in 100 years.
Because I was going to ask you, like, at the end of the day, it's a medical, like a scientific creation, but at the same time, art has a very important role in its process. So is there, what exactly are the limits of creativity when you're doing a medical illustration? You also said that some artists like to leave their
the mark of the hand,
signature.
Well, medical illustrators do just literally their signature, sign their work, and it's important that, if possible, they retain the copyright to it unless they have a contract and are working for hire. I think that everyone who enters the profession is an artist and understands that this is a field where art is in the service of medicine, so it can't get in the way of the communication, but sometimes the visual appeal of the piece can attract the viewer and help them understand, maybe create a calm tone. And as far as the mark making, so obviously if you're using a pencil or even on a tablet, if you're sketching, everyone has their own mark and their own handwriting and their own style. So I think artists try to retain some of the actual look so that it looks like it was almost handmade, but can be made completely with digital tools.
How important is it for students, not only medicine students, but also like any scientist student, how important is it for them to use art in their learning process, and how can we enhance it? How can we use it to our own benefit in order to better understand what we're trying to learn?
I think really from the anatomy courses, doing a sketch and drawing is a really good way to reinforce what you know, because you can put down what you know and then you understand what the gaps are, what you can't figure out what the connection is, or what the spaces are in between when trying to understand anatomy. For me personally, when I'm working with a doctor or a client, it's extremely helpful for them to even make a very simple, scratchy sketch, because that helps me understand the hierarchy of information, what they are, the key components that they are trying to communicate. I'm listening to them, I'm watching what they make on the sketch, and then I'm transforming that into something where I hope I have created a design that leads the viewer in, that explains the information, what the primary information is, what's the secondary supporting information. Maybe there's even a third level of information. And then really the artistic or the aesthetic part is mostly executed at the end. The beauty of the piece, maybe going back and putting a few highlights on and making it sparkle, or drawing someone's attention to it. So I think that as far as the medical students or doctors, I think it's great if people will just keep a sketchbook or practice their own sketching and drawing, maybe for publication, maybe not. but certainly when working with an illustrator, showing them some of the sketches too.
Yeah, we in our curriculum we do have a class that's humanism in medicine, where we address like a lot of aspects of humanism and art, and we did this a lecture with Oriana, was her name? I
Yes,
can't remember,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
And her lecture was amazing, and she made us do these anatomical drawings, and it was so interesting. Do you think that a more art, especially drawing and illustration, should be included in the medicine curriculum? Do you think art is included enough in our education?
I think there should be room for a little bit more art, and it can serve a couple of functions. It can serve this communication function, or just helping people memorize or understand their own studies. It can be a way to process and relieve intense experiences. There's the graphic medicine and comics in medicine, and I think it can enrich anyone's life to have even a modest practice of some kind of art to supplement their career.
Amazing. So during the presentation, you were asked about artificial intelligence, which is something that we've already discussed in this podcast. How do you feel medical illustration will change in the future, and how can you incorporate these technologies?
I think that AI is good now with creativity, and I'm thinking specifically of Midjourney, can create some, with verbal prompts, can create some very imaginative images. I think at present it's not successful with clarity of communication, which, as I've emphasized, is the specialty of the medical illustrator, clarity of visual communication. It's possible that the developments will advance so quickly that it will be able to learn that. There are concerns about the images that are supporting the AI currently. Some of those are copyright protected, and they've just been scraped from the web. And I think there are many ways that AI is going to assist us in what we do, and I think it's hard to imagine right now where we will be in 5 or 10 years with AI, but I think it's important to not be afraid of it, to consider how it can be helpful.
Totally.
I would like to think of AI as a helpful intern, and have them support and take away some of the tedious tasks, maybe provide some creative perspective, but not completely replace the really the thinking of the medical illustrator.
I think also, like, if I could add to that, I feel like AI can make amazing images, but at the same time, no one will understand the needs of a physician better than another person. When, like, a doctor needs a specific picture of a surgery, there might be things that are, like, really important that they are in the picture. Mm-hmm. Maybe some are less, or to focus in more specific thing. And I think that is way easier for an illustrator, because you have a human mind and you understand the way your mind works and the way your understanding process happens, rather than like a computer.
I think that again, what we focus on, a real tool, is hierarchy of information, and I think that AI is currently creating fantastical and creative images, but not necessarily images that yet can create a hierarchy, and also a design that makes sense.
Okay. And do you, how do you think that, because AI has been claimed to be using, as you said, like, copyrighted art and other people's ideas, do you, as a medical illustrator, and I'm not just referring to artificial intelligence, but in general, do you struggle a lot with copyright issues, like people using your images without your consent?
It is a concern, yes,
Yeah.
but I sign everything that I do, and I actually sign things not on the white part of the paper, but I put it
Okay.
in the image, so somebody would have to work hard to remove the signature, and I think that's good protection and kind of promotion of who created the work. You saw Max Bradel signed all of the
Yes.
pieces, and it had the year that he created them, so that's helpful as well.
Also, going back to something you said before about diversity in the drawings, we've also in Yuriana's lecture, we were shown that most medical illustrations, especially older ones, were only depicting a very specific type of body, a very specific type of person, of skin color. Or how are you making any improvements in that sense, and also what is the importance in the more medical sense that every type of person is represented?
Yeah, I think it's very important. Most of the work that I do with surgical illustration just shows the inside of the body, and but I think that it's very important for patients to recognize themselves in patient education, and we've been doing it for 20, 25 years, really trying to represent diversity. I live in Baltimore, which is a predominantly black city, and we have been aware of race, gender for sure, and I think more recently not showing the completely fit body, but showing what maybe more variety in body type is important as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I read, like, specifically for dermatology, there's a lot of pathologies where the like the symptoms and the manifestations were like very different when with skin changes. Like you would not see the same in a person with a lighter skin or with a darker skin, and I feel like that is super important because at the end of the day you might not be able to diagnose them as you should.
Yeah, so it's not just the patient population, it's the healthcare providers as well who need to be aware of diversity.
Okay, for that's pretty much it. If there's anything you want to add, you've gave amazing insights. It's your presentation was amazing, and we learned so much. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was a good experience doing the podcast. This is you had great questions, and I really enjoyed talking with all of you.
Thank you very much, and that would be it.